Okay. Erev Tov for everybody. I hope everybody is comfortable getting ready for the imminent Chag. Um, and so, of course, we're going to talk about Pesach and the Seder, but specifically this evening, I want to talk about the matzah, and actually the name or the title at the top of the sheet um, is borrowed, is stolen from from a wonderful, wonderful person. Um, when I was in high school, on Erev Shabbat, excuse me, Erev Pesach, I used to go to Brookline. I lived in another suburb of Boston called Malden. I took the subway and the trolley, and I went to Brookline, and I would bake matzah with the Boston Rebbe, Reb Levi Horowitz, and he was just a wonderful man. He was just wonderful. I wasn't that close with him, but I used to go there then, and I went there for a couple of other. He was just wonderful, and and uh, as I was in high school, I was just becoming dati. So and this was like an important thing. I really, and the matzah, we baked for him for like I'm going to say around 2 hours, and then we'd go home. And at the end, he gave everybody one matzah, and that was the matzah that you would eat at the mitzvah of achilat matzah. And it was very moving. It's very spiritual. You made the matzah yourself, and the Rebbe handed it to you. And the first time I went, he looked for the biggest matzah he could find. He said, you need a big matzah. And the Rebbe himself was very short, maybe 5'2", 5'3". And of course, at the time, I was 6'2". I was a big guy. And so you need a big matzah. And and then many, many years later, so this was 1965, 66, 67, maybe into 68, that I did this with him. And then many years later, I was living for 2 years in Miami, in North Miami Beach. And I saw in one of the Bate Knesset, a few blocks from my house, that the Boston Rebbe was there to speak. It was a couple of weeks before Pesach, and he was going to speak about matzah. And I just had to go. I just had to go. So I went, and he spoke beautifully. And I mean, I sat there and I cried. He was talking about and I sat there and I cried. Nobody else was crying. He was actually funny, and I'm sitting there crying. And afterwards, I went over to him after Motzei Shabbat, after we davened, and then I hung around a few minutes just to say how much I enjoyed his words, and to say how important it was for me becoming religious to bake matzah with him. And he takes both of my hands in his, and he looks up at me and he says, always remember this power in the matzah. And that's why I put that at the top of the page. If you're looking at the sheet, that's what the Rebbe said to me. And like I said, I was never close with him, but I remember when I was living in Stamford, Connecticut, and I heard that he passed away in 2009. I just read it, and I sat down to read the obituary online, and I'm just reading it, and I just found myself crying. He was just, even though, like I said, I wasn't that close to him. We probably crossed paths maybe 10 times, but each time was so very special that just reading his obituary and the fact that he was no longer with us, I just sat there and cried. It was just, he was very, very special. And my feelings about matzah and baking matzah were formed back in those days in the 60s, when, when other people found other things to get turned on about. But this did it for me. So there are 3 psukim that I put at the top of the sheet. And these are the main, they're not the only psukim, but the main psukim that mention matzah in the Torah. And the first two are in chapter 12 of Shmot, which is what we read Parshat HaChodesh 2 weeks ago. And the last one is from chapter 16 of Devarim, of Deuteronomy. And you'll see why I put the third one in. But let's take a look quickly at these two, at the two from Exodus, from Shmot. Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu. For 7 days you have to eat matzah. But B'yom HaRishon tashbitu se'ur mibatechem. Not only do you have to eat matzah, we're going to talk about this when we get to the backside of the sheet. Not only do you have to eat matzah, you have to destroy, put to rest the se'ur, the chametz, the leavening products. Ki kol ochel chametz, anyone who eats leavened products, things that have risen, okay, eats chametz, nichrata hanefesh, the soul is cut off. May Yisrael, from the Jewish people, miyom rishon ad yom shvi'i. So before Pesach, you have to destroy, and that was always one of my favorite mitzvahs growing up, of course, was burning the chametz. It's always a lot of fun. And then with my kids burning it, who's going to have the biggest fire? That was like a big deal, was burnt. But you have to destroy it, and it destroys you if you consume it on Pesach. First verse. Next, ushmartem et matzot. You want to know where shmura matzah comes from? The concept of guarding the matzah. This is the verse. And you should guard. Now, this translation says observe. That's not a good translation. It's better to say guard. You should guard the matzot. Why? Because on that very day, I took your multitudes out from the land of Egypt. Ushmartem, you should guard the matzah, but also guard at Yom Hazeh L'Dorotechem, Chukot Olam. You should guard this day. So in other words, there's something about making this day special and making the matzah special. And the word for making something special, more valuable, more important, is to guard it. You only guard things which are really important to you. So we guard the matzah, and we guard ourselves. We guard the concept. We guard the memory. And the last verse, so based on these two verses, you could say that the matzah has to do with the Exodus from Egypt, with the Geula, the redemption. But look at the last verse, which comes again from chapter 16 of Deuteronomy, Devarim. Lo tochel alav chametz shivat yomim. You can't eat with your food, with your meals, for 7 days any chametz. Okay? Instead, tochal alav matzot. You should eat with your meals matzah. What is that it says? It explains what's matzah. Lechem oni. And that phrase, a poor man's bread, he translates it here, bread of distress. So we now have two references to, it's 3 verses, but there's 2 references to matzah. In Shmot, when talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus, we say the matzah has to do with leaving Eretz Mitzrayim in a hurry. It's about the Geula, the redemption, the leaving Egypt. But in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, it says, this is poor man's bread of distress. And that seems to mean it doesn't remind us of the Exodus as much as it reminds us of the servitude. And really, the matzah does both things. And at the Seder, we do this way at the beginning of the Seder, before we really get going with the story, before the kids ask the 4 questions, we hold up the matzah and we say, halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction from this verse. Tochalav matzot lechem oni. Bread of distress, poor man's bread, bread of affliction. But later, when we talk about the symbolism of the matzah, Rabbi Gamliel says, the matzah symbolizes the redemption. So which is it? And the answer is obviously going to be, by the time we finish in the evening, both. But we have to see how that's going to develop. Okay, so let's begin first with a number of commentaries on this topic. And the first one is the Ibn Ezra. I apologize, I'm having some allergy issues. My eyes are itchy a little bit. Please forgive. So the Ibn Ezra says, 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, and that's on the first verse on our page. The reason for shall ye eat unleavened bread is to recall the matzot eaten when they left Egypt. So he's emphasizing the idea of Rabbi Gamliel. The matzah represents the geula, the redemption, the departure. They were not previously commanded to eat unleavened bread, save for that which is to be eaten with the Paschal lamb before midnight. So in other words, before this, they said, it should be matzah with the Korban Pesach, this Paschal sacrifice lamb. However, God now commands them that they eat unleavened bread for all 7 days in memory of what happened to them when they left Egypt. As is written here, for it was not leavened, didn't have time to rise. Had the Egyptians permitted them, or us, our ancestors, to tarry a bit, they would have leavened their dough. In other words, the speed made it so that they had to have this bread which didn't rise. But he's going to say something interesting now that's important for us to remember, even though we don't pay attention to it. What happened was they ate unleavened bread for 7 days until Pharaoh was drowned on the seventh day. The heavenly cloud led them day and night, and they did not tarry very long, even when they camped. It is similarly written when discussing the Paschal lamb, 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread. They would, Now, according to its plain meaning, the text 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, stating an obligation that thou mayest remember the day you came out of Egypt, is proof of this. So in other words, they couldn't. We're going to see in the next paragraph that the bread couldn't rise because they kept moving. So look what the Orach Chaim. We're going to come back to something that the Ibn Ezra said in a minute. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. This is connected to the fact that Israel's dough did not rise due to the suddenness of the redemption. You may well ask how the Torah could legislate a memorial for something that had not even taken place yet. After all, the dough did not rise because of the constant motion of the people carrying it on their backs, something that occurred on the morrow, the next day. But listen to what he's saying. It's not that there wasn't 18 minutes. It's not 18 minutes that they stood still, which really means, even though you go to the store and they say 18-minute matzahs, and the general rule of thumb is make sure that the matzah is baked within 18 minutes of when the water comes into contact with the flour. But it's not really true. If you continue kneading, moving the bread, that stops it from rising. Rising not only requires time, it requires rest. Now, when I bake when I bake challah, I go out of my way to give it plenty of time to rise, and then I punch it down and let it rise again. But even though I let my bread rise for a minimum of 2 hours, usually it's closer to 3 hours, if I kept punching it down during those 3 hours, it wouldn't turn into chametz. It would stay matzah, because the motion, the movement stops it. Even though we are very makpid nowadays, put on the timer, once the water hits the flour, 18 minutes, everything has to be in the oven and baked, or we destroy it, we throw it away. So both of these ideas are going on in there. But again, the matzah in both of these interpretations, I haven't quite finished the Orach Chaim, I'll finish in a minute, both of these interpreters are saying that the matzah has to do with the Exodus, with the movement, with the quick change from slave to free man. It's about the geula, the redemption. We're not talking about this as representing servitude, as we saw in the pasuk from Devarim. So I continued now in the Orach Chaim. They had not even slaughtered the Passover lamb when they got these instructions. They got these instructions on the 1st or 2nd of Nisan. They didn't sacrifice the lamb until the 14th. They didn't even take the lamb until the 10th. And yet, and already the Torah speaks of an annual memorial to something that had not happened as yet. They're being told at the beginning of the month, oh, for thousands of years, you're going to remember what you're going to do in 2 days. Well, why don't we wait for those 2 days? And then we'll say, what it's like, what's going on here? It's like we're putting the cart before the horse here a little bit. The whole Exodus would not occur until the Israelites had slaughtered the Passover and eaten it with chametz, and had therefore acquired the merit enabling God to take them out of Egypt. This is the day which God would remember for them in order to take them out. In other words, they can't, yes, they're getting ready, and God's telling them that they're going to remember this forever. But he's telling them this based on the fact that they're going to do it. If they didn't do it, if they didn't really put their effort into this, it wouldn't have happened. What's fascinating about what the Or HaChaim is emphasizing here is we think about, oh, thank you, Hashem, for what you did for us in Egypt, and that's true. However, we cannot forget that the Jews had to participate. There was an obligation for us to be involved. And I feel this way, by the way, right now, when like things are happening all over Eretz Yisrael, there's a war going on, and there's, and there are things happening in Lebanon, and my son is in Lebanon, and the things going on in Syria, and sadly, the rockets again coming close to Ashkelon, which is, has us all worried and concerned. But the fact of the matter is, we are all involved in this. It's not just the soldiers on the front line. All of us are taking part in this effort, in this endeavor. And that's the way we have to look at it. And that's what the Jews were being told in Egypt. You cannot just sit back and watch it happen. You must participate. And that's the emphasis, especially in the Or HaChaim right here, that we are part of the story. And the fact that we are part of the story, that's what we're really, more than anything else, talking about at the Seder. And, sometimes people get this sense that we're just witnesses to history. And that's not the Jewish point of view. The Jewish point of view is we are participants in history, and we have to feel that way. We have to feel that way, even like I said, when it's not me that's going to war this time, it's my son and my grandson. But we have to feel that we are part of the endeavor. That's the major point that the Or HaChaim, less extent the Ibn Ezra, are making. The Kedushat Levi, a more Hasidic point of view. Matzah. Matzah alludes to creatures who serve the Lord due to the impact upon them of God's miracles. Matzah is a reaction to a miracle from God. Even the plain meaning of the text in Exodus, and those 3 verses include the 2 verses I have at the top of the page, alludes to this, as it contains a commandment to eat matzah as a reminder to future generations of the suddenness with which the Egyptians reversed their attitude as the masters of the Jews to driving them out with all possible speed, as we know from Exodus 12:39, which tells us that the departure of the Jews from Egypt occurred in such haste that they did not even have time to allow the dough for next day's bread to rise before baking. Now, I want to emphasize this point about rise for next day's dough, next day's bread, because they baked matzah every day. Most people baked bread every day, but because they were moving, the bread that they baked ended up being chametz. Ended up being matzah. Ended up being matzah, not chametz. And if you look in the Shulchan Aruch into, I'm going to say into the 1600s, maybe even into the 1700s, most people baked their own matzah and they would bake it during Pesach. I can't imagine any of us, I never have baked matzah during Pesach. But it happened that year, and it happened until sometime in the 1700s, factories started producing this really, really thin matzah that could last for months and never go bad. There are halachot up to the 1600s that talk about matzah that became moldy. Has anybody ever seen moldy matzah? That these hard crackers, they can't get moldy. They would survive, God forbid, a nuclear war. There's nothing is going to harm them. But that was when we stopped making softer, a little bit thicker matzot. The only ones that still make these softer, slightly thicker matzot in general are teimanim. And they still bake even on Pesach. When you look in like the Mishnah Brura, written at the beginning of the 20th century, came out in the years around World War I, the Chavetz Chaim talks about the fact that Ashkenazim don't bake matzah on Pesach anymore. And when he says that, you can tell that once they did, but it was already a couple of centuries before that. And there are more and more halachic authorities, Rabbi Schechter, for example, at YU, who is saying that the matzah does not have to be totally thin and totally crisp. You can make it so that it can fold a little bit and be a little more flexible. And a lot of people want to make that kind of matzah because the Hillel sandwich was originally called korach, and the korach means fold. So in the time of Hillel, they took a matzah, they put inside it the korban, the sacrifice, the Paschal lamb. They put in the maror, whatever they used for bitter herb. They folded it into like a little sandwich. They folded it. That's what the word korech means. In modern Hebrew, kricha is a sandwich. And but it's only in the last couple of centuries that we, especially Ashkenazic Jews, have gotten used to this really thin, hard matzah. But it's not obligatory. As long as the matzah bakes through within the 18 minutes, it is kosher and fine. And when I bake my own matzah, it's not like pita or anything like that, but and I do put holes in it to keep it lower, but it does fold a tiny bit. It is a little bit flexible as opposed to the matzah that I buy from the famous bakeries. Okay, the Kedushas Levi continues. Which tells the Pasha occurred in such haste that they did not have time to allow the dough for next day's bread to rise before baking, and every day they baked matzah. Consuming the meat of the Passover took place in similar haste, ready to begin marching at any moment. The symbolic acts that we, the descendants, perform on the anniversary of that event all reflect the haste in which the redemption overtook them. These acts mirror the impact that God's miracles had on the Jews. that we were changed by the events. In contrast to this, when the same people arrived in the desert of Sinai prior to receiving the Torah 7 weeks later, they had time to prepare themselves for that event for 3 days. They took 3 days. The third, fourth, and fifth of Sivan, and then the 6th day was when Moshe came down with the Torah. Those 3 days they prepared, they baked, and they cooked. By that time, they had come to realize God's performing miracles was something natural, not supernatural. It was the same creator who had performed the greatest miracles by creating the universe. When they became aware that only God could have created them by merely uttering the necessary words, they no longer needed miracles to know that there was such a power. To reflect the newfound insights, the offerings presented on the festival of Shavuot did not require matzah. The shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread brought as the korban on Shavuot, is chametz on purpose, because by time we got to the foot of Mount Sinai, we were able to stop, take a deep breath, and get ready for a celebration of the power of God that we had experienced. And to hear, we're ready to listen with relaxation, with a settled mind and body to God's laws, because this was going to be a study session. It wasn't going to be a quick run out of Egypt. We were going to sit and study. That's what happens at Mount Sinai. So they had chametz. It's actually the only communal sacrifice in the Beit HaMikdash, which was chametz, was that shtei halechem, those 2 loaves chalot on Shavuot. And so what the Rebbe in the Kedusha Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev is explaining to us is there are parts of Torah that require haste and zrizut, and then there's Torah study, which requires yishuv hadat, settled, slow down, think about it. Let's talk about this. Let's discuss it. And that's the difference between matzah, quick, and challah/chametz. Let it rise, slow. Let's take it slow. And different parts of our religion have different requirements of us. And we see that specifically Pesach versus Shavuot. The Bnei Yissaschar. Now, I love this Bnei Yissaschar because the Bnei Yissaschar, to write what he did here, must have known about baking. He must have done some baking. He talks about philosophers. I don't think he's talking about philosophers. I think he's talking about bakers. The philosophers have already explained that the nature of dough is to be a vessel for air. Dough, I take flour and water. I don't even have to put in baking soda or yeast. Just the flour and the water alone is going to make it a receptacle for air. It's going, if I don't touch it, it's going to rise. The nature of dough is to be a vessel for air, ruach, wind. And on Shavuot, we prepare for this ruach by bringing the Shavuot offering with chametz. It's about relaxed spirit. Allow the spirit to overtake you. Sit back, relax. In the Beit HaMikdash, there were 93 vessels, as the gematria for tzava, which means an army. 93, tzadi, bet, aleph, 93. It was an army of stuff in the Beit HaMikdash. This comes from the hint, and you guard the matzot. What does it mean to guard the matzot? You guard the matzot in order that the ruach not enter them. That's what we're doing. We're stopping. When I pound on my matzah, and I put the holes in it and I throw it into the oven quickly, I am preventing the air from entering the dough and causing it to rise. I'm keeping the ruach, the air, out in order that the ruach, the air, the wind, the spirit, not enter them. For on that very day, I brought out the hosts of Israel. Please try to understand. I like that. I like that he threw in that expression. Please try to understand. I mean, I hope he was talking to people that knew how to bake because it's just easier to understand some of his ideas. But I like that. Please try to understand. The true matter of chametz is that there is no yichud in the endeavor. What's yichud mean? Yichud means unity. I and the dough do not become one. Why not? Why? How come when I bake challah, I am not one with my dough? Because I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, okay, and I make the dough, and then I go to shul, and then I come back and I punch it down, and then I ate breakfast, and I pick up a couple of items I forgot to buy earlier in the week, and then I come back and I shape the challahs, and then I do something else for another hour, and then I put them in the oven and they bake. Most of the time, I was not connected and unified with my challah. The challah rose for 3.5, 4 hours. Probably 15 minutes of that was me actually being physically in contact with the flour. Maybe 20 minutes. I was physically in contact with the flour. What happens when I make matzah? I start the clock, on the timer on my oven, right? 18 minutes. And then I pour the water into the dough. There's not a second that I'm not in physical contact with my dough. So the dough becomes me. In the flour and the dough that I make from my challah becomes itself. It's its own creation. It's beautiful. I love my challah. Okay, it's delicious and all of that. But it's not me. It's the challah. But the matzah is me. There's not a second that there isn't me, or in this case, Rivka's grandchildren, Rivka's son-in-law, my son. We're going to be, a bunch of us doing, but there's not a second when you're just leaving that dough alone. So that's what the Rebbe means, the Bnei Yissaschar means. He says there's no yichud. There's no total contact between me and the dough. I am the dough in the matzah. That's not true in the challah. For added to the action of the artisan is another factor. When it's challah, what's the other factor besides the baker? The ruach, the air that just rises and brings it up. Those bubbles that come in there. When I punch down, I can hear the bubbles pop sometimes in my challah dough. By the way, I love punching down the dough. I just want to mention that as a side issue. You don't get to do that with matzah because matzah you're working it all the time. But there's something that's very emotionally rewarding when you get to punch down the challah dough, especially if I've had a bad week. There's something it's very therapeutic. I love punching. Okay, forget about that. People are going to want to send me to therapy, but I find that the challah is my therapy, so it does the trick. Okay. For added to the action is another factor, ruach. Therefore, the dough has gavaut. It has haughtiness. It has risability. It's just big, and it's it. It's not me. It's it. With the matzah, it's all me. There's a big difference. That's what the Boston Rebbe meant when he gave me a large matzah, because I'm the matzah. Because we work on it. We don't leave it for a second. This is the intent of the destruction of the chametz as a segula, as a special idea for the destruction of idolatry, and to focus on devotion to God in matzot and mitzvot. And they can be spelled the same way. Mem, tzadi, vav, taf can be read either matzot or mitzvot. It's so important. The way we make matzah is the way we're supposed to do mitzvot, which is we put our kishkas into it. We're really involved in the making and doing of it, which is just the focus and the action of the artisan from start to finish with intent towards God, which is why as we're making the matzah, there's a minhag, and we actually put it up when I used to bake matzah with middle school kids in Stanford, in Connecticut. I used to put a big sign on the wall, "L'shem matzot mitzvah," and that's what it's like it's almost like a like in meditation, it's almost like a mantra, "L'shem matzot mitzvah." And you just keep saying it over and over. There was always a girl who did it a few years ago, who came up every year with different songs that she would sing L'shem matzos mitzvah to. But the idea is we are intent on this is for the purpose of the mitzvah, as opposed to when I make challah, which is I love it because it's delicious. The matzah I love because it's a mitzvah, not because it's delicious, and indeed, it's not all that delicious, actually. Please try to fathom for I have been brief. I don't think he's that brief, and I cut out some. The Torah describes matzah as lechem oni, a poor man's bread, but the way it is actually written in the Torah is lechem ani, poor bread. It is the bread that is poor, or is it the person that is poor? In truth, both are the same. I am the matzah, and the matzah is me. That's one of the reasons I really like to, at least at the Seder, eat matzah that I baked myself. I am the matzah, and the matzah is me, and the matzah is being made by people who are intent on this being for the mitzvah, l'shem matzot mitzvah, for the sake of the mitzvah of eating matzah. Our mitzvah is not just to eat the lechem oni, it is to be the lechem oni. We need to be like that bread, as opposed to challah, where we need to make the bread different, and that's need, K-N-E-A-D. The need here is me and the matzah. The need there, K-N-E-A-D, is separating me from the challah. And it's just a beautiful idea. And especially if you baked your own matzah, when you come to the Seder and you eat the matzah at the meal, it is a very special occasion, I find. I have to apologize. The next is Rabbi Amnon Bazak. And I have this bad habit. When I put Rabbi Bazak on the page, I forget to write rabbi. And that's not nice of me. And the reason for it is very simple. We served in the army together in the 90s. And I was in my 40s, and he was in his late 20s. So I'm quite a bit older than he is. He's a tremendous scholar. I wish I could, was as productive in Torah as he is. But I when I write his name, it's psychological. I don't write Rabbi Bazak, which I should, because he deserves the kavod. But I just think of him as, my fellow soldier, Amnon, who slept in the cot next to me in our tent. Okay, but he says beautiful ideas. From the obligation to eat matzah stems the prohibition against leaven. The mitzvah of matzah is what caused us to prohibit chametz. One, we have the matzah, and that eliminates the chametz. 7 days you shall eat matzot, but on the first day you shall eliminate leavened product from your home. So it's the matzah first, then get rid of the chametz. It seems unlikely that this prohibition results from that which the Torah tells later. The nation carried its dough before it leavened, an event that transpired only later. It is thus reasonable to assume that the prohibition against eating chametz also relates to the status of the home as an altar, a mizbeach, a little piece of the temple, regarding which the Torah instructs any meal offering that you offer to the Lord shall not be prepared as leaven, as chametz. In other words, Rabbi Bazak is telling us that another factor in the reason that we stay away from chametz is because, except for Shavuot, for those special reasons we spoke about 10, 12 minutes ago, all of the sacrifices on the Mizbeach altar in the Beit HaMikdash, Holy Temple, were matzah. And we want our table at the moment of the Seder to be like the altar in the temple. And that's a beautiful idea. And when we had the Beit HaMikdash, we ate korbanot. In other words, the meat that we ate, the Paschal lamb, was actually a korban, was actually part of an offering to Hashem. And we don't have the sacrifice anymore, sadly. Hopefully, next year we'll have it, maybe even this year. It's time for Mashiach to come. But we do have the matzah, and the matzah reminds us that what we're eating is divine food that is related to the divine avodah, service to Hashem. Now, I don't know who this Rabbi Brovsky is. I apologize. He's also on the website from Yeshivat Har Etzion, but I saw the article and I like this idea that he brought out, especially at the end. He makes this nice point that I'll try to make relatively quickly because we could spend a lot of time on it, but it's a nice idea. Unlike other prohibited foods, the Torah not only forbids eating chametz. I can't eat pork, right? But it doesn't. I can own pork. I can sell pork to goyim. I can own a pig. It's not, it prohibits, but with chametz, it prohibits owning it. Furthermore, unlike other prohibited foods, the Torah explicitly prohibits a mixture containing chametz. In other words, if I, by mistake, threw a little bit of treif meat into a big vat of kosher meat, there's beetle. The treif meat disappears. It's ke'ilu. It's as if it doesn't exist. There's nullification, bitul. That doesn't work with chametz. Chametz is always chametz. And a little bit gets into a lot on Pesach, I have to throw out the whole thing. In addition, we are commanded to dispose, tashbitu, of our chametz. There's no mitzvah to destroy treif meat or meat that got mixed with milk. You don't have to destroy it. You can give it to a goy. Okay, you can get rid of it. But chametz, I have a mitzvah to destroy it. To search our houses, b'dikat chametz, locate and destroy any chametz left in our houses, and even declare null and void any leftover chametz. We make a declaration. If I missed some crumbs, may they, ke'ilu not exist. May they be like the dust of the earth. Thus, a unique picture of the prohibition of chametz emerges. Chametz is apparently the most strict prohibition in the Torah, except, chametz is portrayed as an evil entity during this 1 week. Chametz is like bad. One must search and destroy it. Many view chametz as a symbol, at least during this 1 week, of avodah zarah. The only other prohibition in the Torah that has some of these same levels of strictures to them is idolatry. And idolatry is like the biggest no-no in our religion. I mean, we're very careful to make sure we stay away from anything that smacks of avodah zarah, of idolatry. Excuse me. And now Rabbi Brovsky makes a nice point. He gives us 6 points in which idolatry and chametz share this level of chumrah, of, of of stricture, of being absolutely machmir about it. And here are the six. He gives credit to Rabbi Menachem Kasher, Olav Shalom, for the list. Okay. Both chametz and avodah zarah share the unique prohibition against possession. I can't own. If you know, if someone gave me, something that had been worshipped in a temple to idolatry, I can't own it. I have to get rid of it. Number two, both must be destroyed. There's a mitzvah. If it comes into my control, I have to destroy it. Both are isuri hana'ah. I can't derive any benefit during Pesach from my chametz or from idolatry. Both must be, I just read that, both cannot be nullified in a mixture with permissible material. There is no bitul, there is no nullification. Number five, both may be nullified through an oral declaration. I can do a bitul to say I don't own it, it doesn't exist vis-a-vis me, which we do Erev Pesach for chametz, and I can do that for idolatry. And six, just as we check our houses for chametz before Pesach, the Jewish people were commanded to search the land of Israel for remnants of idolatry. The most famous, although this happened when the Jews went into Eretz Yisrael under Yoshua, but the most famous example of it was with Yaakov. When Yaakov comes back to Eretz Yisrael from the house of Lavan, he tells everybody to search their tents before they come to Beit El, where he was going to bring a korban, an offering to Hashem, to make sure there was no avodah zarah in their tents. And that whole process got copied and reenacted in the time of Yoshua when the Jews came into Eretz Yisrael. Okay, one last comment on the page about matzah. And this is from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik isn't known for being an overly emotional person. As a Litvak, Lithuanian great scholar, he's known for being, cerebral rather than emotional. However, when it came to preparing for the Pesach Seder, he tended to get quite emotional about it. He would tell stories about Seders when he was a child with his grandfather, Reb Chaim, and he told stories about his father, Reb Moshe. And in later years, I remember him telling stories about Seders with his wife. And it was just interesting that the Rav, who didn't spend much time generally reminiscing and being sentimental, when it came to describing the Pesach Seder, he was different. He was much more emotional and personal about it, and a lot of the normal formal, like almost like separation between the Rebbe and us fell away when he talked about Pesach. And so he talked about matzah. Matzah is the symbolic transcript. It's like, when I read this, it's symbolic. There was an old joke about someone who had matzah on their table, and they invited someone blind over to the house during Pesach, and the blind person started running their fingers over the matzah, and they said, "Who wrote this gibberish?" So because the blind person thought it might be Braille, and then it didn't make any sense. But so I remember that terrible joke from when I was a kid. But here it says, when the Rav said matzah is the symbolic transcript, in other words, we are reading the matzah. We are reading the matzah. That's what's so fascinating. The matzah is ke'ilu, as if a transcript of our experience, is the symbolic transcript of the intimate experience of childlike clinging to and longing for God. When we do the Seder and we talk about the children, the four, I used to say sons, but now, my My daughters get upset with me. The 4 children. We're talking about the 4 children. It's all about parents and children and grandparents and grandchildren. It's all about multi-generational. And so we become, when we remember what it was like at our Seder with our Zaidi, then we become children again. The intimate experience of childlike clinging to and longing for God, of finding Him not at the level of noesis, of knowledge, of intellect. The Rav couldn't resist using a word that nobody understands to get his point across, but the level of naivete. Everybody at the Seder is a child who's naive. But a level of naivete, faith, and feeling. The delivery from all restrictions and limitations. Mitzrayim is the same word as mitzarim. Just remember a few minutes ago, matzot and mitzvot. Mitzrayim is very much like mitzarim. Limitations, strictures, limitations, tsar. It's narrow. The ascent from bondsman to freeman is attainable through the root experience of man, with the childhood commitments and perceptions, with the uncritical surrender to and naive trust in God. When the Jews left Egypt, we were acting like children. God said, go. You won't have time for the matzah to rise. You don't have time for it. Just move. And nobody said, wait a minute, shouldn't we put some water together? Shouldn't we get some, shouldn't we go to the supermarket? Shouldn't we, make sure we have, tents, and make sure we have sleeping bags, and make sure. Nobody said that. God said move, and we just moved. We gave up on our normal behavior of being concerned about details. We just went. And that he calls childhood commitments and perceptions, with the uncritical surrender to and naive trust in God, with the incomplete rationality, with pre-adult notions and verities. We remained children, at least until we got to Har Sinai. We acted like children. And that's the way it's supposed to be, because we are God's children. And it's important that there are events that bring us back to this childlike naivete. The Rav also wrote. He's talking about Rabbi Gamliel. And when Rabbi Gamliel says, hold up the matzah, and the matzah represents the geula, the redemption. In my opinion, Rabbi Gamliel wanted to say that genuine geula, genuine redemption, always comes suddenly, unexpectedly, at a time when people are ready to give up hope. Sometimes historical situations continue to deteriorate. People pray and cry, begging for mercy, but there is no answer to their prayer, only silence. At that moment, when the crisis reaches its maximum and threatens the very existence of the community, when people begin to give up, the geula suddenly comes and takes them out of the land of affliction. It comes in the middle of the night and knocks on the door when no one expects it, when everybody is skeptical about it, when everybody laughs off the possibility of redemption. That's when it comes. And the only thing in my life that to a certain extent compares to what the Rav is talking about that night when everybody just jumped when God said go, was the 6-Day War. I remember the weeks, the month leading up to the 6-Day War. There were all those jokes about everybody was going to leave Eretz Yisrael, and and someone put up a sign, in Ben Gurion Airport, last one to leave, please turn off the lights. It was, I mean, everybody thought this is it. It's all over. And the Geula came that Sunday morning within basically a 10-minute span. Within a 10-minute span, the majority of the Egyptian Air Force was destroyed. The greatest Geula in my lifetime very much echoes what the Rav is talking about the Jews did in Egypt. It's sometimes important for us to remember when things look so bad. And October 7th was pretty bad, and we're not out of the woods yet. But sometimes from these darkest of nights comes the dawn of Geula. And this Pesach, we are, again, with the matzah, reliving the instantaneous dawn of Geula. And we're trying to remember how it did happen in Egypt. And then we have to hope that, yes, indeed, it's going to happen for us. B'meheira v'yameinu, hopefully very soon. And then we'll share together. We'll say to not just with great matzah, but we'll do it with the Korban Pesach too, with the Paschal Lamb as well. Everyone should have a wonderful Pesach with their families. Everyone should have a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and I'll see you Be'ez Hashem in 2 weeks. And thank you for joining. And bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Chag Sameach.
Amen.
Chag Sameach.
Here. It's just happened to the right.